was looking out the window of my office here, we began to see the wind change, began to see the trees start to move, and you could see the tornado moving through the south part of the city out the window, and we could see the track of it. And of course, we had many people taking shelter, and I knew when I saw it that it was probably close to my personal home, but I couldn't leave the courthouse at that time. So it was nearly dark that night before I was able to leave the courthouse. And as I traveled down 15th Street, I didn't see any damage on the part of 15th Street that I was on off of Greensboro. And I lived in Wood Manor off the Hargrove Road, but when I turned on to Hackberry Lane and then turned off of Hackberry Lane to get into Wood Manor, I began to see major damage, telephone poles, light poles across the road, houses damaged. I had to park at the University Place School. When I walked into my neighborhood, which was just one of many neighborhoods that was affected, I saw major damage. I saw my house was completely destroyed.
The biggest thing I can remember is just being in shock after the tornado. And when you look around at your house and see how close you came to getting mashed down to the floor with the tree, it took me probably a few weeks to get over it. I may not be over it yet.
When we got back to the TV station, that's when it kind of hit me. I'm like, my God, where do I go now? You know, I can't go home. You know, what I do? I'm just immediately homeless.
April the 27th of 2011 will live on in the hearts and minds of people for decades to come, because 62 tornadoes touched down in Alabama in a 24-hour time span, 29 of those right here in central Alabama. Right here behind me, we got our first look at the devastating EF4 tornado that went into Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, developed right here in Knoxville, Alabama, and ended up near Tarrant in Jefferson County. All in all, $10.2 billion in damages were done on April the 27th of 2011, and it was definitely a red letter day here in Alabama. Tonight, we are going to take you through the Coleman tornado and the Tuscaloosa Birmingham tornado and give you the science behind why that day was so bad. And you will hear from some of the greatest scientists on the planet and survivors of that day. We're here only on The Forecast with Stingray and TP. Welcome inside another exciting edition of The Forecast with Stingray and TP. And although it is very muggy outside today, it is very, very calm outside. However, 10 years ago today, that was not the case, my friend.
No, 10 years ago today, we're witnessing probably the worst outbreak in the history of outbreaks here across our nation. And yeah, so lots to unpack on what happened 10 years ago today.
Well, let me just go ahead and start with you. What do you most remember about that day, Taylor?
the most thing I remember about that day was the seeing the tornado from the local station up here in Huntsville, Channel 48. Brad Travis, a friend of mine, who is the chief up here. I remember specifically sitting in my living room and all of a sudden him yelling. I believe it was Elizabeth Gentle who was doing a report from the Athens area, and he was just saying, "We've got the tornado on our sky cam. Take the sky cam full." And they had a camera on top of their radar where it sits right over there off of Highway 72, and all of a sudden you just see this just massive wedge tornado that is just barreling towards right there the intersection. I believe it's 72 and French's Mill. There's a church that's over there too. Lots of houses. It actually went over a golf course, so I knew exactly where it was at, and just seeing that just image just really stuck with me because it was, from up here, we didn't, I knew there was a tornado in Tuscaloosa later on. I knew that there was other stuff down there, but that was one of the biggest ones that we saw up here. And just to see that on TV was just, oh my God, that is just, that's humongous. So that's probably one of the biggest things I remember that day. I was a senior in high school, so I wasn't in my professional career by any means at that point. So it was a lot of the day just revolved around having to go to school. I remember we had to go to school, and there was actually a tornado warning in place at that point. We weren't under it. I believe it was for the northern part of our county, and we had to go and get into I think it was the auxiliary auditorium, I think is what it was called. Yes. And go sitting there. And so the majority of the school day, we were there only until about noon. And it was about back and forth between in class, out in the hallway, in class, back out in the hallway for tornado warnings. And finally, we got released in between the break between the second line and the supercells.
Yep.
So, a lot of my memories revolved around not only that big tornado that happened towards the Hackleburg and into the Athens and Monrovia area, but just the school day in general, things that we had to go through. We started to get up and go to school. So that's kind of everything that I really kind of remember.
Well, that morning line, early morning that started out in Tuscaloosa, I think it was about 4:30. Yeah. That one was not that you got the weather people were not prepared for that one.
It was looking back on it, like I mentioned, I was a senior in high school, so most of this stuff I've learned post event, especially with the scientific part of it. And it definitely was one where we knew a line was probably going to come in, but it ended up being a lot more potent, a lot more vicious than the models were kind of pointing towards. And so that one did kind of catch us a little bit off guard. I guess the meteorologists that day were kind of thinking, okay, well it will come through, maybe a watch will be out, maybe a couple warnings here and there, but no, that created a lot of damage, and that actually unfortunately created a lot of infrastructure damage that affected people not only from that second line that came through, but when the supercells came through, there's already people without power with damage. There was no weather radio transmission. The towers were affected, either down or power wasn't be able to get to them. So people were not able to actually get some warnings during the afternoon.
Yep. Well, let's go ahead and start. And I've actually got some interviews here that I did a couple of years ago. So we're going to go ahead and start with how long before the event did we know that it was going to be bad? And it was about 7 days out. The models looked like they were insane. And, we were joking, me and Richard, my friend Richard Scott, we were like, man, if that really happens, man, this is going to be bad.
Yeah.
And we didn't figure that it really was going to, but unfortunately it did.
Yeah. And it was one of those, and one of my friends put it perfectly on Facebook the other day, which was usually when we forecast severe weather events, you can see things about 7 to 10 days out when you're looking at pattern recognition and stuff. So you can kind of not really pinpoint exactly where it's going to happen or the big parameters and stuff, but you can kind of see, okay, something big is probably coming down the road that will affect somebody somewhere in this general area. And you started seeing that about 7 days out. Now, usually what starts to happen is the models might not be all fully on board with it. They go back and forth. They start to lessen the threat. There's been many, many times I've seen, oh, well, that's a major outbreak look right there. And then by the time we get to it, it's 70 degrees and sunny. And it kind of really just fell apart, or it got moved to a different day, or it really just didn't, come to fruition at all, which is good. This one did the complete opposite. It started showing itself about 7 to 10 days out, and it looked really robust from that point. And it kept getting worse. It kept looking worse. It kept getting it. Think about it this way: it looked like an outbreak possible 7 to 10 days out, and by the time you got within like the 3 to 5 day time frame, it was about 10 times worse looking than that was.
Yes.
And then you got to within about a day or two before it, and then all of a sudden it's like this thing's off the charts. This is not good. And it started, people in the weather community really started to ramp up their wording about 3 days out. And I want to say that on the day 2 outlook, we weren't under a high risk yet on day 2. I think we were still under a moderate risk, but that first day 1 outlook, they had the high risk, and I think that's what the case. I don't think we had a day 2 high at that point, but it looked horrible about 3 days out.
Well, let's go on ahead and hear from some of the greatest scientists on the planet, the people who run the National Weather Service in Calera. We're also going to hear from some other chief meteorologists around the state of Alabama.
Well, we had talked on the phone before that. I mean, gosh, probably a week out, we were saying, wow, the computer models were incredible that day, 7 days out. Just some of the ingredients that were coming together, some of the red flags we look at whenever we forecast severe weather, all the parameters just looked incredible, just unreal. And in fact, I remember, kind of joking 7 days out, like, gosh, I mean, if that really happened, that'd be bad. But obviously, that's going to change, just like most events do. Most of the time we see setups similar, and they just kind of fade away in our model data as we get closer to it. Well, this didn't happen. This just kept looking more and more aggressive as it got closer. And when we got 3 days out, in the consistency of our computer models, everything showed the same thing basically. That's when it really started getting frightening, when we're starting to forecast, hey, this is a big deal. Please have a source of weather information whenever warnings are issued, because this isn't going to be one of those events where we might have a few tornado warnings and not a big deal. This is going to be the big tornadoes, and there were a lot of them.
The weather forecasters did a Herculean job preparing the state for April 27th. Several days out, they started telling the public that the 27th was going to be a bad day. Didn't know how bad, but it was going to be a significant event day. The Tuscaloosa News had a major front page story discussing this, and when the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Birmingham, it was Jim Stefkovich at that time, does a briefing to people statewide and tells us that the parameters that we're seeing for this storm system are such that we have not seen these in our careers. It's going to be a bad day. What you don't know is where.
Probably about the Thursday before. I was working in the days leading up to that. Believe it or not, that Sunday was Easter Sunday. Before that, April 27th was on a Wednesday. And I think we were just finishing up the April 15th event with all the storm surveys on that Friday before. So I remember on that Friday, we were discussing that we needed to go ahead and wrap up that April 15th event as far as the storm surveys are concerned, and get on to the forecasting for April 27th, because we already started to see signatures that far in advance.
Well, we were concerned immediately off the bat. It's severe weather season in Alabama, March, April, and May. You're really at the peak season. When we saw those first forecasts and the extended guidance on day 7 and day 6, we knew we were pretty confident there was a threat. And as we drew closer through 5 days, that's when we really started to become concerned that we were looking at the potential for a significant event. And of course, as we got closer, those model runs were consistent, confirmed our concern, and then from there we were convinced that we were in for trouble.
Well, actually, believe it or not, even 2011 being a good 10 years ago almost, the event was actually very well forecast, and actually we had some inclinations a week in advance. I know the forecasts that we were putting out at ABC 3340, we started talking about the potential for severe weather. Now, did anybody know leading up to the event that it was going to be the magnitude that it turned out to be? Absolutely not. We all knew, though, that the ingredients we look for, some of the things we look for, like temperature profiles, wind shear, positions of the upper low, the surface low, just everything was coming together to be right for severe weather. But again, no one knew the magnitude that the event was going to be.
Well, it had started on the news for about a week ahead of time predicting it. We'd had several people, broadcasters, saying that it was going to be really bad. You know how on the weather a lot of times you start hearing it, but it's not going to be as bad. But several broadcasters had predicted this time it was going to hit. So we had been looking at it several days, expecting it to come in and be bad on Tuscaloosa.
It looked like a severe weather day about a week in advance, but a week in advance you don't really know the specifics. Once we got within 3 days, within 72 hours, it became obvious that this could be a red letter day, a day with violent long track tornadoes. But even then, you really never know. We've had setups similar to that where really not that much happens, so you just don't know until you get into it. But I'd say within about 3 days, we had a pretty good idea it would be a red letter day with the possibility of violent long track tornadoes, which is what happened.
Well, that's a good question, because you remember that spring we had many tornado warnings and watches. The weather seemed to have been rough that spring in particular, and so I hate to say that we had kind of gotten, or I had kind of gotten relaxed and not as worried when I would hear the sirens, because we would hear the sirens and then nothing would happen, and so it kind of became a common thing each week for a storm to come through and to hear the sirens and not think that a tornado really would come that big. So really didn't expect it. It caught us, I think, off.
And so definitely it caught a lot of people off guard as well, and especially that early morning round as well that we were alluding to earlier. All right, well, let's go on ahead, if you don't mind, and let's go on ahead and get to our first guest. Yep. And this guy is a friend of mine, and he and I interned under Wes Wyatt up at Fox 6, who's at Fox 6 now, but we actually interned it under him when he was down at WVUA. And he has actually been at the National Weather Service in Memphis now, but during the event, he has family around here, so let's go on ahead and get his take on the day. Michael, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Man, I'm good. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I hadn't talked to you in a while, so it's good to reminisce, bud.
Yeah, man. It's been a long time since we come from the VUA days, man.
Yes, absolutely. Well, go ahead and tell everybody what you're doing nowadays.
Right now, I'm a lead forecaster at the National Weather Service in Memphis. I started my career doing TV. You know what I'm saying? I went to Mississippi State, and I think Richard Scott's going to be on here too. Me and Rich, and you were interning under Wes back in the day. You know, we did all kinds of stuff. You know, of course, Richard went on to be, you know, an integral part of April 27th, and I chose to, you know, got lucky enough to get in the weather service after graduation. Went to Caribou. That was my first office, Caribou, Maine. That's where I was during the event. Then after Caribou, I went down to Slidell, Louisiana as a journeyman forecaster. Was there for about 7 years, and now, again, like I said, National Weather Service, Memphis lead forecaster. So,
well, man, leading up to the April 27th event 10 years ago, what were your thoughts going into that event? I mean, because we were seeing numbers that were off the charts.
Well, that was one of the things that you know, we were young, in our careers then,
Yes.
and I was what 23, 4, 5, somewhere in there,
Yes.
and we've been doing weather for a little bit, but I never saw any numbers or any setup like this. This was insane. Uh, STP values of 12, 13,
Hmm.
so far out, and
Right.
it was almost you almost were like, this can't be real. Um, Something has to be off. It
Right.
can't be that high. Um, and there you start looking for things to say, oh, maybe it won't be that bad, or you start looking for things and you just couldn't find it. And it was several days out when people started to say, hey, look, this could be bad. And one of the things that I really remember is that was like the earlier days of some of the mesoscale models and stuff like that. And I had never seen models render supercells
Yep.
like that. Like even some of the synoptics, your GFS, were plotting supercells.
Right.
That I never saw that before. Like individuals, like it was that strong. It was that big of a signal that your synoptic cell type models were plotting supercells, which to me I was like that's bad. This
Hmm.
is bad.
Yeah.
And then once you start seeing the HRR and some of the earlier some of those models, and it's just painted a horrible picture. And again,
Right.
you're just thinking like, is this going to happen? And it turned out that it did. So
Right.
it was one of those days that I felt it was I early days of Twitter too, and so
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
tweeted. I was like, guys, this is bad. Like I had actually reached out because I had a lot of friends that are school teachers in Tuscaloosa, and they were like, is it going to be that bad? And I went out of my way to text one and I said, hey, listen, this is going to be bad. If y'all get a warning, please take it serious. It's going to be bad today. I don't know when, where, what time, but it is going to be bad. And she said, okay. And so I knew right off the bat once the day started. The early line of storms that morning, I didn't think that was going to happen. But I just knew when that first real confirmation, when that Coleman tornado, the first one,
Yes.
everything
Yep.
that real quick. It was violent and it was on TV, and I was like, okay, everything is going to look like this
Yeah.
probably,
Yes.
and that was 12, 1 o'clock, and I was like, man, it's going to be a long day.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
Taylor, you got any questions, man?
Well, I could, piggyback on what he said with the that first Coleman tornado. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I mean, I was a senior in high school then, very much, not aware of all scientific and stuff going on the weather side of things. But looking back on it, yes, having that first Coleman tornado look like that and that storm look the way it did, that was a telltale sign of that's what every single weather storm is more likely going to be looking that day. And it just, it's still awe inspiring to me just to, look back on it and to think that everything that could have gone right in the case for severe weather that day went right. There's a lot of events that we look at and it's okay. Well, we had a little too much of this, or we didn't have enough of that, and it kind of mitigated the threat and stuff. Every single thing that could have gone right into producing a widespread tornado outbreak went right that day. And it's, it's very interesting to look back on. And it's also very just, horrific looking as well. But one of the questions I have for you, Mike, is you said you were born and raised in this area, right?
yeah, I'm born and raised in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, so you're no stranger to dealing with severe weather and stuff like that. Have you ever since that time, ever looked at kind of severe weather threats the same way, or did that kind of change the way you kind of look at things?
Well, for me, you know, being a Met and knowing that you're going to have to deal with these events from time to time, that that definitely was the highest bar event that I personally, for severe weather, not including hurricanes, but
Mm-hmm.
like severe convection, that was the highest bar that I have ever seen in my short career so
Right.
far. Um, and it didn't make me look at anything differently. It just makes me think, okay, here's the bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I see things approaching that bar, again, you can't say every event's going to be like this or whatever,
Right.
but you start looking at different values and different composite, you know, indices and things. So, okay, well, give me this and give me that. But of course, with weather, it's like you're saying, everything has to go correct. Everything has to go right. And that is one of those events that everything went correct, like you said. And since then, there hasn't, to me, been an event quite of that magnitude that everything went correct like that,
Right.
in that manner. So
Well,
it necessarily didn't change the way I looked at things. It definitely changed the way how I try to message as a forecaster. It definitely changed the way how, to me, April 27th gave meteorology or meteorologists like some personality. It gave us some empathy. It gave us some reflection to be like,
mm-hmm.
okay, we did everything that we thought we could do, and yet 200, 300, 400 people died,
Yeah.
and made everybody go back and say, what can we do better? And we're getting better, we've gotten better, but at the same time, sometimes you just lose.
Yes.
You know, like those were such incredible storms going through certain like populated areas. They weren't in the middle of the sticks and stuff like that. They were hitting towns, hitting communities, cities, and you have anything at EF3 plus going through densely populated, people are going to die. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's what happened. And there's only so much you could do. Because I remember, you know, schools were out, people were shutting down businesses. Like that was the first time that like all this stuff like happened to that magnitude, and
Yeah.
people
It was almost like we're preparing for a major winter storm.
nothing you can do. Some
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so
just
you
like what
know,
you said with those, EF3s and stuff going in, I tell people, a lot of the time now, when you start dealing with EF4s or EF5s, you unfortunately you have to be underground. I mean, if
yeah,
you get one of those, it's the only thing that's going to be left is your foundation. Especially if you get
hmm
an EF5, just go wipe that slab clean. So you
yeah,
really need to be in one of those storm shelters and a community storm shelter. If you have one in your house that's very well, metallic, can withstand an EF5 strength, but you have to be underground for some of those things. So yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but we all can know about it that if you get one of these tornadoes that comes through a big populated area like that, there's only so much you can do,
hmm
and all you really can do is just pray that people can get through this, and be okay.
yeah. Yeah, that's what stuck out to me too, because I know there's been a lot of research and reflection after that, man. And like I said, you know, April 27th was a generational type event. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it changed the face of Tuscaloosa. It
Oh yeah.
changed the face
Yep.
of how people in the South deal with weather. Because since then, it changed the way that we react. It changed so many lives, changed so many communities, for better or for worse. But it changed. You have a whole set of people that remember this day.
Yes.
Small
Yep.
kids, older people, people my age, you know, y'all our age, you know, people that worked the event was directly had a hand in it. it changed the way they think, they thought, it changed how they prepare, it changed a lot of things. So, and to me, it was a generational type event because
Mm-hmm.
it's not to say that we can't see another one like that, uh, because you don't want to say it'll never happen again. It
Right.
will. It will. It's just one of those things of how, frequency, how frequently it's going to be. And that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like I said, it was one of those high bar type events. And you'll reach that bar from time to time in your lifetime. But to have that much, that much devastation, those type of tornadoes, that strength, how big and violent they were, it's going to be hard to do again,
Yes.
a lot
Right.
of times. So, most of the time it's just, that was just one of those events.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, being so far up north and seeing that tornado plow right through Tuscaloosa, what was going through your mind when you saw that?
So, I was at work. I mean, I was at home in the beginning of the event. I had to go in for a shift later on that evening. And I was watching live stream. I was watching James Spann, whoever was on, and I saw, I was watching like every other person, and I saw the Coleman tornado. I was sitting on my couch in my little apartment in Caribou. And I was like, man, this is bad. And so I just had this pit going into work in my stomach, like, this is gonna be bad. And so once things started unfolding, and then the tornado went through Tuscaloosa, I was at work, and I just told the lead forecaster then. He was real, they were understanding. I said, listen, man, I can't work. Um, I checked out. Like, I was at work, but I was not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I called my parents. Uh, thank God they were on vacation. They weren't even there.
Right.
I called my parents and told them, I said, listen, you need to call everybody that you know. I said, turn on your phones. I said, people are dying right now as we speak. And you need to call everybody that we know to make sure they're okay if we can get to them. Uh, because get a hold of them, because I was like, this is extremely bad. It was
Yes.
just bad. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I started calling people and making sure people were okay. Um, and like I said, I just checked out of work. I was there at work, but I told them, I said, hey guys, I'm calling people, I'm watching. I just can't function in a regular, like, here, go do this. I said, "God, I'm not here today. I said, I'm just not here today. It's not happening. That's like
Yes.
it's not happening. I'm too worried about, I just saw hometown get ripped up, like, knowing that it was terrible. You even have to
Yes.
wait for it. Just the sheer violentness of the way it looked. You just knew it was bad. So, um, it was just one of those. It was tough. I felt helpless. I wanted to,
Yes.
I wanted to be at the weather service in Birmingham helping him out. I wanted to be
Yes.
in the studio with Richard helping him out because he
Mm-hmm.
was young in his career. He was green, and he had his that's going to be his event that he'll never ever forget. That made him, he got baptism by fire type of thing. He was
Yeah.
young, brand new with that one, and so I wanted to help Richard. I just felt helpful, like helpless. I wanted to do something because I knew how to do things, and I wasn't like being there with Richard or at the weather service helping them issue warnings. What I just wanted to help, and I was
Mm-hmm.
in Caribou, and I just sat. I couldn't do anything. It was a helpless feeling.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of states that were affected by that storm system. What kind of weather did you guys have that far north?
To be honest with you, I don't even remember. It
Okay.
wasn't nothing
Yeah.
because
Okay.
I didn't, after the storms, like I said, I checked out.
Yeah.
I was like, what's happening back home? Or making, you get kind of, when you have a connection to,
Yes.
like, that's home. And I didn't worry about what was happening in Caribou for a couple days. I
Right.
Mm-hmm.
don't remember what happened after that. All I know is Are people okay? I felt the need to go back. I wanted to go back home and help clean up. I
Yes.
wanted to go back. I just wanted to hop on a plane and go home
Yes.
and do whatever I could do to help. But that's how I felt. I wanted to go
Yes.
help, but
Yeah.
being like 2,000 miles away, that
Yes.
was a hard task. But that's
Well,
how I really felt.
how long was it before you got to come home?
I was a couple months afterwards, and then I came home, and it was just you didn't recognize the city, like some of the landmarks, all the stuff was gone. It was just bare. All those houses along 15th Street, all the businesses, and golly, like I've never been. You could see clear across Tuscaloosa. It was
Oh
insane.
yeah.
It was crazy. Um, it just was. It was surreal to be like,
Yes.
I remember all of these things here. They're not there anymore. Like
Right.
it's empty, and
Yes.
that was crazy.
Well, you work with the Weather Service now, and you've
Hmm.
worked with them at two other places.
Hmm.
In your opinion, going back and looking at that tornado and based off the damage that you saw, would you say it was a high end 4 or would you put it as a 5?
You know, to me it kind of doesn't matter what
Okay.
it was. It was just bad. So
Yes.
you got the damage indicators, and people want to say it's a 5 or high and 4. At the end of the day, it was bad,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it was
Yes.
devastating. Uh, you know, us in the weather community, we like to have labels and put benchmarks to things. And
Yeah.
some of that is cool, and sometimes you just got to realize it kind of doesn't matter what it is. And I kind of feel like we're going to some of that,
Hmm.
even with like hurricanes and things like that, how we message it. Everybody wants to get caught up on categories and things like that.
Yes.
Just, hey guys, this is going to be bad. It's an impact. It could kill you. Like,
Yes.
let's figure this out later. I think we're
Mhm.
going more to along those lines where, if it was an EF5, then, the difference between an EF5 and EF4 is 1 mile per hour. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So
Mhm.
it's kind of like, so either way, it was bad. And so,
Yes.
if you want, it's gonna be what it is, regardless of what we call it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, my last question for you is this. Staying on the hurricanes, how do you feel like the hurricane season 2021 will be?
And everything. I just like to say, hey guys, prepare for whatever hurricane or
Yes.
tropical storm it's gonna
Yeah.
be. It doesn't matter. It only takes one storm. You know, it
Yes.
could be your Hurricane Andrew, and it could be a Category 2, and it could be called Hurricane Bethany or whatever. But that could be your Andrew, that could be your Katrina. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what it is. You just got to prepare for it. Now, if it's going to be active, we'll see. You know,
Yes.
uh, but like the last couple years, we had Michael and uh, Irma and Maria and Dorian, some of these big
Yes.
hurricanes,
Mhm.
Cat 5s, Cat 4s roll and hit our country and stuff, and you just got to prepare.
Yeah.
So that's the overarching principle for me, is to tell everybody, just prepare for it. Uh, and again, it only takes one storm. Take it seriously. I got my promotion right before hurricane season last season, so I didn't have to deal with all the hurricanes. I was thankful.
Yes.
But our friends in Lake Charles took it on the chin twice by
Yeah.
major hurricanes. Um, and my colleagues in Slidell, the run up to a hurricane is exhausting. Like, a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of people
Oh
don't
yeah.
know behind the scenes how much work goes on in the weather service offices. We're talking to emergency managers, we're talking to governors, we're talking to senators, we're talking to whoever, 4, 5, 6 days out. We roll 12-hour shifts, or whatever we need to do. So there's a lot of run up to hurricanes, and it's a lot of work. So those guys and gals down on the coast, we work hard. They work hard, and it's one of those things that we prep starting in October. I mean, like not October. We start prepping now, like way,
Right.
way, way. We start prepping in February for tropical storms in June, and July, and August, and so we start prepping in February, January. I know along the coast they do, uh, getting the forecasters trained up, making sure all the systems are working, making sure the emergency managers know the changes that we make to the hurricane programs and things like that. Those guys and gals work hard down there. So
Yes.
again, like I said, just prepare for the season. If we get one, just be ready. If we
Hmm.
get another one, try to get ready again. Know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's just one of those things where, we live down south. We always gonna have something going on. So just prepare.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I don't think I've ever thought in my entire life I would see Louisiana get hit by not just 2 or 3, but 5 separate hurricanes in one
Yeah,
single year. I never
absolutely.
thought that was even going to be remotely possible.
Man, look, it was a year. I know
Yeah.
those. Look, I talked to my colleagues down in Slidell. After I left, and again, I wanted to go back and help them. If it
Yes.
had not have been a COVID year, I think I would have been able to go back down and help because
Yeah.
some offices do that where we bring in forecasters from other offices to help with the workload because it's a lot of workload. But I think if it hadn't been COVID, I would have been able to go back to help and help a couple times, maybe help the people in Lake Charles and help the office in Lake Charles and help the office down in Slidell, or even Mobile, whoever needed help. We
Hmm.
sometimes forecasters get deployed to different places and try
Yes.
to help uh, backfill for the office that's getting directly impacted. So you know, it's been a year.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, look, man, thank you so much for joining us. And is there anything that you would like to give a shout out to or tell people how they can follow you on social media?
Just follow. Hey, I just say follow your weather service accounts: Birmingham, Jackson, Memphis, uh, Slidell, Lake Charles. Follow your accounts for weather. Um, and if you get Richard on here, tell Richard I said what's up,
I
and
will.
Oh,
tell
yes.
everybody I said hey man, and it's good talking to you. Thanks for having me on, Steve. Man, I
Yes.
appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you. And y'all,
Good
you
to see you,
take care,
Mike.
okay?
Thanks, Taylor.
All right. Well, man, that was an interesting interview, and
Hmm.
I really enjoyed it. And I would really like to pick his brain a little bit, about how different the weather is, from here versus up in Caribou, because
Oh, yes.
we get tornadoes pretty regularly here, but I don't know about way up there.
If I had to guess, I would say they're probably more damaging wind territory.
Yeah,
But I mean, for sure, definitely pick his brain. That's one of the areas of the country I've never been up to Maine before yet. I've
yes,
never been north of Pennsylvania yet, but it's one of those places where it's not only beautiful landscape, but it has some very interesting weather aspects to it too.
absolutely. All right, man. Well, let's go on ahead real quick and talk about the next thing is what caused that day to be so violent back in 2011. And like we talked about, everything was off the charts, but it was also because of the placement of the low pressure, too.
Yeah, and if memory serves, we had several days leading up to this where we didn't really have anything going on.
Yes,
We kind of slowly got a little bit warmer each day, and it's kind of like what we're dealing with this week. I know we're not dealing with the severe weather threat for this
yes,
Thursday, but it was kind of the same thing where we started off, we're in the upper 70s. All right, now we're in the 80s, 80s again, and then boom, there's your system. One of the
yes,
things that was I wouldn't necessarily say a unique aspect because we've seen these many times with the way that the low pressures will set up. Is that this wasn't just really one solid area of low pressure? It was actually multiple areas of low pressure that kind of got going along a stationary front and then finally became one main area of low pressure that then finally pushed that cold front. It was actually more of like a pseudo dry line. It was actually more of a dry line that came through, and then we had some cold air come back behind that one.
Yes.
But it was definitely one of those where it stands out. And I know earlier you rolled the tape with Richard
Yes.
talking about how it's just we look for signals and stuff, and when you get something that really stands out, it's like, holy cow, look at that.
Yeah.
That was what they were what we were seeing that day. And so you had the multiple waves of low pressure come through, and that's actually the way that they got going. That's what created, to some extent, the MCSs that came through during the morning time frame. You had one line or storms that were well off to our west, congealed into a line, and then that came through during the morning hours. And actually had this other wave that came through behind it. It only affected parts of really northern Alabama with that. But then you had what was really just looking back. I know you asked me a question earlier on in the show that what was one of the things that I remember most about the day, and I said it was seeing that tornado on the TV in Athens. The other thing that, being a weather enthusiast as a senior in high school, I knew some aspects of how severe weather gets created, and in a sense like that. But one of the things that I really found just kind of mind-boggling in a sense as a 17-year-old at that point, it was literally just a couple of days from our birthday, was you always talk about severe weather, and especially with that type of magnitude, you're going to expect the sun to be out and beautiful skies, and then boom, there's your thunderstorms, and then you're going on from there. That really wasn't the case for April 27th. You had not only one but two individual lines that came through, and almost 9 out of 10 times you see that severe weather threat for the afternoon hours, unless something drastically changes, like you get sunshine and stuff, it ain't going to happen, because that has just completely wiped away all your instability. So you had not one but two MCSs come through, and you had clouds. You still had clouds lingering throughout the day. Yes, there were some peaks of sun here and there, but it was still pretty just cloudy. It was mainly that kind of high, dense overcast type of late morning to afternoon leading up to the storms. And then all of a sudden, boom, there goes the storms. And the instability values are still at about 2,500 out there. And that was because you had the very cold air coming up aloft with that trough moving in, and you had some dry air in the mid-levels. And like I mentioned, most of the time you get that type of scenario and you have clouds, your instability is not going to be that high. But because you had those other things in place, you had dry air moving in the mid-levels, and then you had cold air moving in aloft, you still also had temperatures close to about 80 degrees outside too. I mean, it was just juicy. I remember walking outside not only that morning, and it was like, man, it's just sweating already. And then I walked out to go to my car when school released to go back home, and it was still like, this is just oppressive heat. It was like 80 degrees outside. The dew points were in like the mid 70s. It was pretty moist out there, and just, but yeah, that's one of the things that I thought was very interesting. And also looking back on it, how the way that everything's set up with the waves of low pressure forming along the stationary front, then that main low finally developing and getting really, really strong, and everything was just perfect with it.
In the atmosphere, a lot of times you have, it's rare to get this combination of high instability and high shear. On that particular day, really that particular month, we were in an environment that's pretty rare here, where we had both ingredients at a very, very high level. So typically we have one without the other. Like, for instance, a typical summer event may have more instability and a lot less shear. Typical winter events have more wind shear and a lot less instability. But during that month in particular, April 2011, for both events, April 15th and April 27th, we had both ingredients at a very, very high level. And that's rare for us in the Southeast, but it happened on that day.
We had a combination of the atmospheric parameters that's pretty much what we've never seen before. significant tornado parameter was over 10. The instability of the shear, they were all at maximum levels, which is a rare occurrence here. And the combination of those maximum levels together really made that volatile environment.
It takes a lot of things coming together at the right place at the right time for severe weather, and for an event of that magnitude, all those parameters almost have to be off the charts. I think one of the things that was impressive were the wind fields. The winds 20, 30,000 feet off the ground were over 150 knots. They were just screaming. The wind fields were unbelievably strong. The buoyancy, the ability of air parcels to rise freely was about as strong as it ever gets in April. And then with a very dynamic cold core trough coming in, the stage was set for trouble. So those things happen about every 40 years. That's why I call them generational.
You know, that month was so volatile. We had a very active subtropical jet stream, and on top of that, an active polar jet stream. It was a perfect combination where you had a very strong jet stream that was nearby. And essentially, that provides uplift in the wind shear, which are two important ingredients for tornado development. And we had so much energy in the jet stream. We had these, what we call disturbances. We have these troughs that progress across the jet stream, and they were, you know, evenly spaced basically. It seemed like every few days we would have a severe weather threat, and that's exactly what happened. Fortunately, we haven't seen a setup like that since then, with an active subtropical jet and active polar jet, with so many disturbances within the jet stream. In a prime location for us to have severe weather here in Alabama. We've had severe weather obviously since then, but just not the repetitive nature we had back in 2011. It was just something I've never seen. And if you go back before the severe weather season, if you remember 2010 to 2011, we had multiple rounds of winter weather in Alabama. There are several times where we had snow in Alabama, in central Alabama, including Tuscaloosa, and that just shows you that active subtropical and polar jet that I was talking about. So not only did we have an active tornado season before that, when the jet stream was further south, we had active winter weather.
So yeah, do you remember the snow in 2010?
Oh yes, oh yes. The big one that I remember was, I think that was also the year where we had. Did we have snow around Christmas?
Yes.
Okay, that's the one that we had snow either on Christmas or around Christmas. But one of the big things I thought was just, I thought that, okay, if we were going to see this, it was going to be, okay, we must be living in Chicago or something.
Yes.
Which was, we had about 8 inches of snow up here in Huntsville, literally about a week after we started back to school from Christmas break. And we had 8 inches, and it was like I think it was like on a Tuesday night. It came in kind of late evening Tuesday night and kind of continued into the day on, it was Monday, late Monday night into Tuesday. And so we were out of school on Tuesday because of snow, obviously, but it stayed cold for the remainder of the week. And it was cold to where you got the sun that came out, and again, you had about 8 inches of snow on the ground, and so the high on Tuesday was still in the 20s, and you had snow on the ground, and then on Wednesday, the high was a little bit above freezing, but at night, it kept getting below freezing, so you kept getting this issue where anything that would melt during the afternoon would immediately refreeze at night. So we were out of school on Wednesday, out of school on Thursday, out of school on Friday, or at Thursday, and then finally they said, we're just done with the week, because everything in the parking lot just being ice again. And it just never got any better. So it was a very active winter, one of the most active ones I've seen in pretty much ever. I'll almost be 28 years now, so no, it's not a super long time, but still, that's one of the most active winters I've ever seen.
Well, let's move on now to what we've briefly touched on just a little bit, that morning round.
Yep.
The first one that came through Tuscaloosa about 4:30 in the morning put 2 EF3s in Tuscaloosa County before the big one that afternoon. And I can remember because I actually I was in a family business, and I had to get up at 2:30 or 3 o'clock that morning to be at work at 5. and it was a meat processing plant,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually had to drive a pretty good distance. So I'm getting ready to leave right about the time that line is moving in, and I tell you, I do not think I have ever seen the trees around my house bend that far. It was
Oh, yeah.
really nasty. So I was just like, you know what? I think I'm going to just hold off and wait this out. And come to find out, I never actually did get to go into work that day because that line was so vicious. And we actually had a little bit of tree damage around that even before
Mm-hmm.
the tornado that afternoon.
Yeah, that was, and we touched base like on it earlier, like you mentioned a little bit, where the line is like it was expected to come in, but it didn't. It wasn't really expected to be as bad as it was. It was
Right.
kind of forecast to be one of those where, and we see it time and time again, where we'll have big blow up storms off to our west across Louisiana, Arkansas, maybe even Texas, and it will finally kind of congeal into a line and it will move in
Yes.
through the overnight hours. But by the time it really gets into like eastern Mississippi or central Mississippi, it just kind of falls apart because we start losing its ability and all that good stuff. This one, no, it kept coming and it was just vicious. It came in and it created. I will say this. I know that the afternoon round was the worst of the tornadoes. I'm not debating that by any means, but I will say that the fact that we had that first line that came through the way that it did, that really set the stage for this was going to be a horrible day because that did a ton of infrastructure damage. You had many people without power. You had some people who, while their home wasn't damaged, they didn't have power. And that other line came through and had warnings with it, and they weren't able to really get the warnings because without power. And there's also damage to some of the weather radio transmission sites too. So that line really kind of just set the pace for, all right, we're looking at, a very bad day, obviously, but that just made everything a lot worse coming into the remainder of the day because people really couldn't get warnings.
The storms that came in that morning was an MCS, a mesoscale convective system, and basically those produce a lot of damage in straight line winds. Every time we've had that, it's produced wind damage. But the tornadoes from that morning, I've never seen from an MCS. I've never seen within a line of storms EF3 tornadoes. We had one come through Coleman. We had one go through North Tuscaloosa County as well. In fact, there's several EF3s that morning. Strong tornadoes, and that's something I've never seen with a line of thunderstorms, especially an MCS type of thunderstorm cluster. So, yeah, that totally threw me by surprise. I was expecting wind damage, yes, but not the strong tornadoes that we saw. Well, this setup was very extreme. All right, so you had the MCS come through, but unlike most that go down to the coast and kind of hug the coast, a lot of times it happens that robs the Gulf from energy and instability to return north. This one, the southern edge of the MCS, was in central Alabama. It was kind of along Highway 80. It had scooted on by early in the morning, so that allowed the instability to quickly return with that south flow directly off the Gulf. So, unlike previous clusters of storms that kind of sag south and just stop on the coast, this one just kept going. And we had plenty of time that whole morning and the early afternoon for the atmosphere to kind of pump back up to produce tornadoes. And the dynamics from that were so incredible. Even if you had storms on the coast, I still think we would have had tornadoes that day. It wouldn't have been near as bad, but the incredible wind shear and uplift, I think that would have been still a big deal.
The day started actually with a tornado watch issued in the wee hours of the morning. That was something we really were not expecting. We were expecting it to be in the afternoon. So we came down to the Emergency Operations Center and stood up operation monitoring, and there was a heavy thunderstorm that came from the Foster's Ralph area, right up Highway 11. We think it went right over our buildings because of the noise, and it turned into a tornado in East Tuscaloosa. Officially, it started in the area of Vance, but that was when the warning was issued. It actually started a little bit earlier, and that did damage that morning. We also had a northern track tornado that did some damage in the northern portion of the county. With the damage, we had power out at schools, so both city and the county schools were closed. That kept a lot of people off the streets during the day.
I actually reported at 4 o'clock in the morning. Within 5 minutes, I sat down. I issued my first warning on that day. Well, one of the worst things that happens with a line of thunderstorms when it comes through at night, people are sleeping. They're not ready for a storm system. We may have underplayed that system a little bit, so I don't think people were up watching the system, monitoring it. And if you didn't have a way to get notified overnight, like a weather radio, smartphones weren't quite as prevalent back then as they are now. So really it was weather radio. If you happened to be close enough to an outdoor siren, you had a chance to respond. But I think really most people were asleep and it caught them off guard. Just a real hazardous situation when we talk about overnight severe weather storms.
I think we probably under forecasted that line. We had seen several waves before that had started just like that one and sort of ended in Mississippi and never really made it to Alabama. That one in particular, though, as the system continued to approach, it was through the overnight and early morning hours, and it actually kept a lot of the momentum, and it had the similar ingredients to even the afternoon, but it was a little bit under forecast. I think we weren't really expecting it to be that strong as it was, but it certainly was.
The early event that occurred that morning, we all expected to see severe weather to our west, but we really expected that severe weather to diminish a lot before it actually reached Alabama. Yes, we could have some thunderstorms, you know, maybe a warning or two, but we didn't think that that was going to be that big an event. But that event actually held together better than was forecast. So we ended up with a lot of severe weather, including a tornado that affected the Cahaba Heights area. And that tornado, as well as some of the severe thunderstorm events that occurred, knocked power out, which actually played a role, I think, in some of the lack of being able to communicate severe weather information later in the day. It also added a little bit of confusion to people, because it was like, well, okay, you've been forecasting a big event. Was that the big event in the morning? And of course the answer was no, and meteorologists tried to communicate that to people, that the big event was still yet to come. Although I have to admit, a lot of people that I know in central Alabama, we began to have a little bit of doubts. Would that morning event do something to the atmosphere and change what might happen later in the day? As it turns out, of course, in hindsight, we know that did not occur. A lot of squall lines or QLCSs produce tornadoes, but they tend to be on the weekend, with EF2 being perhaps the highest that you would normally expect to see. So the EF3 was a bit of a surprise. The problem that morning was that severe weather, which actually affected the area west of us, it just held together even longer and then morphed into a very strong squall line or QLCS event. And so was I surprised that there was an EF3? Not really, knowing how really charged the atmosphere was overall. We really did expect that line of storms to diminish more than it did by the time it reached us, and by the time it reached Georgia, it really had diminished. So it did execute sort of what we expected to happen, but not quite as quickly as we expected to happen.
Yes, I had to go into work a little bit early, so I was on the interstate, and I could tell the rain was getting rougher than normal, and then it just completely stopped raining. And I'm not going to say the skies opened up, but it was still very dark and kind of had that green tint to it. And the next thing I knew, my car was being turned sideways on the interstate, and a large, massive tree was blown in front of me. So I pulled over to the side of the road and waited for that to pass, and then continued on to work to find out that they were actually going to send us home.
I had no idea the morning episode would be that significant. We had 5 people died in the morning, and we had 250,000 people with no power. That alone is a remarkable weather event. and that itself is a tragedy. We thought the big show would be in the afternoon and at night, which it really was, but the magnitude of the morning event, we didn't really know the night before. Now, the warnings were excellent for the morning storms, but the night before, we just didn't know it would be that.
So definitely it caught a lot of people off surprise.
Yeah, and just like James and everybody else basically said, it's like that. As we've seen several times before, the line gets into Mississippi and it kind of just starts to fall apart. And yeah, there might be a couple warnings or two. Most of those mainly cross the western Alabama area, and then by the time it really gets to the 65 corridor, it's just completely gone.
Yes.
And that was kind of the thinking with the same thing, but no, it kept trucking along, and it wasn't until it really got to Georgia until it really fell apart. So yeah, it caught a lot of people off guard with being as significant as it was. And just like some of the guys in that video said, I think a lot of what happened in the morning contributed to the fact that not a lot of people, or not, I should say, there were definitely some people who weren't able to get warnings as efficiently or correctly that they needed to, especially the afternoon round. And that, just all that devastation in the morning just really made the fact that what happened was that as forecasted the afternoon just made it a lot worse, in the sense that we just couldn't get the information out the best we could.
Right. Well, let's go ahead real quick and talk about the second line that affected you guys, but didn't really affect us, because the southern extent of that was around Marion County and Hackleburg. So when you said that you guys were in cloud cover, after the initial wave in the morning went over, the sun popped out in Tuscaloosa. And so it got really nasty, and I mean, the instability went even further up down here when the sun came out.
Yeah, so you had the first wave that came through that we just talked about, and then we had this other one that came through, and it was kind of where Richard was talking about how usually with that first line it would kind of continue and kind of sag all this way down to the Gulf Coast, where it kind of cut off of the US 80 corridor. The same thing happened with that second one, except that cutoff was further north. It was across, like you said, parts of Marion County, in western Alabama. So that second one came through, and that was the one that I remember being at school, and we had to go back to the hallway around, I think it was like 10:30 or so. It was around, I think it was like second or third period of that day school-wise. And we had to go back into the hallway, and then we went back into class, and then it was maybe 30 minutes later, we were back into the hallway again, because we had another warning along that line. So that line, it didn't produce as big, I say, as the tornadoes did with the morning, that first wave. With that first wave, you had the EF3, and they had some EF2s, and I think some of the other lower end tornadoes. With that one in the second round, it was more, you didn't really get an EF3, if I remember correctly. They were much more the EF0, EF1s. There might have been an EF2. I have to kind of go back and look at it. But that second one that came through, that did a lot more devastation across northern Alabama, knocked out power, trees down, again, contributing to the fact that not everybody could actually get warnings, especially if you lived in a rural community that you were just without power. Yes. And such. So that blew through. And so after that came through, I remember I got to go outside very briefly at close to lunchtime. It was about 11 o'clock, 11:30 or so. I remember I stepped outside just briefly at the high school I was at, and I noticed that it was still very muggy out there, and you still had that cloud cover in place. And lo and behold, it didn't really matter that cloud cover was in place, because, like I mentioned before, you had cold temperatures coming in and aloft, and the instability just stayed up there.
And for those of you that are wondering, we are doing this in order of how it, transcribed through the day. So we've already talked about the morning round. We've talked about, all of the other stuff. Now we're going to get to the Coleman tornado, and then we're going to get to the Tuscaloosa tornado, because the Tuscaloosa one was a little bit later on in the day. So that supercell that developed with the Coleman storm developed just north of Berry. I think it was about 2:15 that afternoon.
Yeah.
And immediately when it fired up, it put out a TVS, and it just completely started rotating just like that. And I knew immediately when that one storm broke the cap, that was it, my friend. It was going to be a bad day.
Yeah, and that was another thing that kind of suppressed the shower activity during the in between that second round that was up here and the afternoon round. Was you did have maybe some very light showers out there. They were very low topped, and then finally once that cap broke, I mean, just all hell broke loose. Basically, in a nutshell, that's the best way I can put it. Which is, you just had all that blow up of the supercell activity going on, but it just looking at it on a scientific side of things, very, very impressive that we not only had one, but we had two lines of storms that came through first, and we still had that type of magnitude of severe weather coming in the afternoon. That just, like I mentioned earlier, 9 out of 10 times, if you get not just one line, but better yet, two lines, you're good to go. There's really no threat after that, but not with this one.
Well, like we were talking about, we're going to talk about the Coleman tornado now. So this guy actually lives in Coleman, the guest that we're going to now, and he actually has home video of the actual Coleman tornado, and it actually changed his career path just a little bit. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are very thankful to bring on Justin Prince. Justin, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. You?
It actually changed. I'm doing good, sir. Just a little bit. So we are. We're having a little bit of feedback on your end. Justin Prince. Justin, how are you doing today? Okay. So it's live technology, man. You gotta love it, don't you?
All right, we're good now.
Okay, good. Justin, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. You?
I'm doing good, man. And listen, tell everybody real quick who you are and talk about the Coleman tornado for a second, please.
Well, I'm Justin Prince. I live in Coleman County. I was, before I become a weather enthusiast, I'm a first responder. And on that day, man, that was just a day I'll never forget. But the afternoon round, it was like a ghost town. Nobody was on the road. I stood in the middle of our main highway and videotaped that storm.
Yes.
And it was just crazy. I mean, there was actually, as I was walking down back from where I was videotaping, I actually found like a thing from a yearbook debris. It actually fell into our parking lot of the fire department.
Yes. And actually, that right there that we're looking at is your video.
Yes.
Tell us what you were thinking when that was going on.
Oh, I was really wishing I could, go on top of the mountain and look at it a little better. But, how those things change directions, you don't unless you're a really experienced chaser, you don't never want to be around one because, I mean, it could have changed directions and come right after me and I'd have never known what to do because I'd never storm chased at that time.
Yes. Well, how did the Coleman County change your career path a little bit like we had talked about earlier?
Well, after that day, that's when I wanted to help people and, become a weather enthusiast. I went to my first storm spotter class and after, I think it was like September of that year, I think August or September, maybe. And after that, I just started posting stuff to my personal page. And then I joined a page called Coleman County Weather Team, a weather page. And then I stayed there for a little while. and helped them. And then I actually started my own page, which is called Coleman County Weather Team.
Yes.
And then later on, we become partners. I mean, not really partners, but we came. What I like to say, I guess more trying to get more groups together.
Yes.
And that's when it was October, I think it was October in 2018 when I approached my friend Steve Owens to become the Alabama Stormtroopers, and which we have 10 states now and looking to get more states.
Yes. Well, what will you take away from April the 27th? And did you have any damage at your location from the Coleman storm?
No damage at my location, but what I'll take away with is a day that I'll never forget.
Yes.
And I just wished I could have got a better video of that tornado and everything.
Yes. Well, what about the morning round? Were you surprised, like everybody else, about how strong the morning round was?
Oh, yes, most definitely. The morning round actually was more surprising to me. I mean, I didn't really think the morning round would be that bad, but it actually surprised me. The tornado actually came through. I mean, it didn't ever touch down in our area, but it knocked some trees down, but it went across and went to Johnson's Crossing, where it actually did damage to their main fire department. And
yes,
that's actually before the afternoon tornado came through, that's where I was at most of the day, helping people get out of their houses in Johnson's Crossing. And then we came back, and the sky was just so pretty that before the afternoon round, it was just,
yes.
I mean, wow. You couldn't have pictured a better afternoon, and then boom, it like somebody lit a match.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor?
So did you after that Coleman tornado, what did you do? Did you try to go and get better video of it, or did you kind of
actually after that we actually went and helped our neighboring department, Trimble. We actually helped people get out of their houses and everything like that. Actually, whenever it was going through, after I got off that video, because the first initial place it was going to be heading to was, they said, Battleground.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching it, and then I think I seen it when it turned, but I told one of my guys, I said, that's not headed to Battleground, that's headed straight for the city of Coleman.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of told some people and tried to get them in the right spot, so if it did come to the city of Coleman, they would be there in their safe place.
Yeah. I've been to Coleman, several times throughout my lifetime, and I know that based on some of the pictures that I've seen from that, I didn't get to go down there and actually firsthand witness the devastation. But even just looking at some of these photos, I'm just like, I can't even make out where that actually is anymore. Can you kind of talk about how just bad it actually was in downtown Coleman?
Oh yeah, I mean the downtown part, like the Busy Bee, it was destroyed completely, and it took, and there's a barber shop that was right beside it, and it destroyed that whole street right there. It did damage to our courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Which 7th Street, not 7th Street, First Baptist Church is right beside our courthouse, and it did damage to it, and it did damage to our dispatch center for Coleman EMS and everything. and then it went straight towards like Fairview out that way in a more rural area. The city was whenever it came through, it went through like Trimble, and then it went through. It went straight for the city of Coleman. When it touched down in Trimble, it did not major damage, but pretty good bit of damage. And then whenever it went through Trimble, it went straight for all those places I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And then hit one of our other big Catholic churches, and then it went kind of down 278 out towards Fairview, and it stayed on the ground for a pretty good little while.
Yes. Yeah.
It just at that point in time, that I'd never seen a tornado before, and that was the first time I'd ever seen one, and it was amazing. I mean, it just amazed me.
Yes. Well, Justin, what will you take away from that day based on the Coleman tornado and then, of course, the Tuscaloosa tornado as well?
Ooh, that, I mean, just a really blessing that no more people was hurt than what there was, and I mean, it's just going to be it's just a day that'll live forever, and in my memory, anyways.
Yes. And so there, of course, is the actual tornado going through Coleman, and back when it was further away from Coleman, it was not really as tight, and then as it got towards the city, that's when it really just got big and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right.
Did you happen to know anybody that perished in that storm?
No, I did not.
Well, that's good. Well, I guess I'll ask you this. Where were you actually located on that day? I mean, how close were you to that?
Oh, man. I was probably less than a mile from my location where I videoed that, from where it actually touched down in Trimble. I was very close. I mean, very close to it.
Right.
So, how long were you actually able to stay in that spot? Was it actually coming at you, or was it kind of coming more at?
No, it was
past.
It was going past me. It was moving. I mean, almost directly down 222. Which I took that path, and then it crossed 65 and went more towards right towards V-line towards the courthouse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, man, look, thank you for joining us. And real quick, I'm going to pull you up full screen. Tell everybody a little bit about Alabama Stormtroopers, if you would like.
Yes, sir, I would.
Okay.
I'm the president of the Alabama Stormtroopers, which also I'm Stormtrooper Network president. We are a group of weather enthusiasts that get our information from the National Weather Service, and we have Stephen as our guy to do our severe weather coverage. And we're a group that keeps God in the center of everything, and we're a family. Basically, we're not a team; we're a family. We do things together. I know, like in June, where everybody's coming to my house, we're having a cookout, and we're going to be socializing and planning things and doing things. But we're just a group of people that love weather and love God.
Yes.
Yeah, you go.
Well, man, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about your day. And hopefully we can do it again soon, my friend.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
Thank you. All right.
Take care, Justin.
So, well, man, I got to tell you what, that Coleman storm definitely was pretty nasty.
It was, and it's looking back and just seeing how that storm did that, and that was the first one of the afternoon, it was just, what else is there to come?
It
And
was a precursor. Yep, it was a
it
precursor
definitely
to
was.
what was
It
going to
definitely
come.
was. It
Yep.
definitely was. And the atmosphere will give you that. It will give you signs of how we'll say sometimes, or we'll see how these storms react as they kind of enter this environment and see how they do. And if you get one of those, if the first one does that, it's like, well, there's a pretty good bet that the rest of them are probably going to do that.
Yes. So, all right, man. Well, now we are to the main show of the show. We actually have a pretty lengthy video here about the actual Tuscaloosa to Birmingham tornado. And what we're going to do is we're going to play it out from where it entered Tuscaloosa County all the way through the city of Tuscaloosa. So here is the memorable track of the monster EF4 Tuscaloosa tornado that went all the way from Knoxville, Alabama to Tarrant in northern Jefferson County. Right here behind me, we got our first look at the devastating EF4 tornado that went into Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, developed right here in Knoxville, Alabama, and ended up near Tarrant in Jefferson County. After the Tuscaloosa tornado developed in Knoxville, Alabama, it moved right here to Ralph, Alabama, and put this tree through this man's house. This is his story.
My name is Jerry Casey, and I live in Ralph, Alabama. And we had a bad experience with the 2011 tornado. The big tree fell, demolished our house while my wife and I were inside the house. And it caught me a little bit by surprise. While I was in the house, the first thing I noticed was that very heavy winds were blowing the rain or hail against the windows, and it sounded terrible. And just about that time, the loud crash with the big tree that fell right on the metal roof. And of course my dog was here, and it took off to the woods and was gone for a day. But I don't blame it. I would have taken off to the woods too had I been outside. We were a dead center of it. It came right straight from the southwest and took probably about 75% of my trees down. We've got 145 acres, and we lost about half of our pines, oaks, and whatever trees. And we made it out without any injuries, thank goodness. But the house was totally destroyed, and we ended up having to tear it down completely and rebuild. Meanwhile, we didn't have any power for probably a week and a half or 2 weeks. And we had trees and power lines down all across the driveway. And no one could get in or out for several days until got some chainsaw people to start clearing it out, and we were able to get in. But we were just thankful to be okay, and at least we didn't die in the tornado like I'm afraid some people did. She was right on the other side of the tree, the far end of it, in the bedroom, and I was in the den, and the tree fell right between us, and the ceiling came down in 2 or 3 rooms. The biggest thing I can remember is just being in shock after the tornado. And when you look around at your house and see how close you came to getting mashed down to the floor with the tree, it took me probably a few weeks to get over it. I may not be over it yet.
As the day progressed, we started following the track of the storms coming through and seeing damage in other areas of the state. Then late in the afternoon, the long track tornado started that came through, actually entered Tuscaloosa County near Snotty Road, which is off the Shallow Road area, came through the Foster's community and entered actually the city limits just near the building we are in today. A friend of mine works in this building, and he called on Southern Link and said, there's a tornado headed straight for you. And the question I asked him was, how are you seeing it? Because you're supposed to be in your safe place. And he said, well, we're going there. Well, at that time, there was a traffic camera that we could control over on the bridge, so we turned the camera that way and we watched it on video. We also, this is a municipal traffic camera, we also watched it on TV from a different standpoint. And we had a good view until the tornado took out the electricity and the traffic camera. So we saw it as it came our way. We definitely felt the building rumble and the tiles in the room shake, but it's more like a thump. We didn't realize at the time how much damage had been done above us because we're on a lower level in an area that's 16-inch concrete reinforced.
Right. Could you hear it at all? What did it sound like?
Doors rattling.
Okay.
Because it was noisy, but it was just, imagine someone shaking the doors, a set of double doors, and just constantly shaking, and then the tile above your head. I was drinking a cup of coffee there at that time, watching the TV, and the dust from the tile started settling, so I stopped drinking my coffee. And as it came through, it destroyed the Richard M. Curry facility, which was the EMA office, the city's environmental service building, which had the trash department, garbage department. It also had the city's facility maintenance shop and a lot of items from the city that were stored there. We were in the basement of that building at a location that we felt reasonably safe. And I say that because literally the week prior to, we had done a course on damage assessment, threat and risk assessment, and we had done an assessment of the building, and we felt that our issues would be not where the EMA office was, but the doors and other portions of the building more exposed. The building had 16-inch concrete steel reinforced walls where we were, but when a heavy storm comes through and it takes off the top of the building, which is concrete block with brick facade, then you may be in a bunker beneath, but it gives you problems because of such things as fire suppression system. One of the things we really weren't expecting was water to come in the building from our fire suppression system. We had a generator and we expected it to kick in if we lost outside power. Unfortunately, part of the wall that was collapsed as a part of the tornado contained the generator switching unit and all the other items. So we were in a building that had no power. We had backup light. We had lanterns and other things just in case, because you always try to plan 3 deep. And you start looking at, well, there are 3 ways out of the building. And one door was partially blocked. One was a open wall to step over rubble. And that's why when you talk about wearing appropriate clothes to work, appropriate clothes are good sturdy shoes, not sandals. And so after the storm hit, and we all looked around to make sure that there's no one injured, did our accountability, we sought the safest way out of the building. And after we did that, we discovered that there were power lines down everywhere, water spouting from various and sundry fire suppression systems. The communication tower for the public safety, police and fire, that was across the street from our building was on the ground. And we were in an area that, quite frankly, we could see the damage around us, but what else was damaged. Our communication at that time was Southern Link and cell phones. Now, Southern Link performed fabulously. We were able to keep communications, but you have a system that's heavily used. Regular phone carriers, if you can think of how many people have cell phones today, even back 6 years ago, a lot of people had cell phones that had cameras, and cell phones with cameras and people taking pictures to send their friends burn up a lot of bandwidth. One of the lessons learned is to encourage people to text. That takes less bandwidth, and text will get through when a cell call won't. And taking that picture to send to your friend, that's nice, but that takes up bandwidth. Keep the lines free so that if there are emergency calls need to be made, they can be.
I was here working at the office at Prince Clover and Hayes Law Firm, and it was about probably 15 minutes to 5 or 10 minutes to 5. We were all sitting here watching the television, watching the broadcast and all where the tornado was at. And my wife called me. I just live about 1.5 miles from here, and my wife called me and told me, she said, "You're no longer with the police department, come home." So I drove home, and just as I got home, we had the television on, but it kicked the power out. You could see the video of that they played most where it was coming over 2059 coming toward Tuscaloosa, and just shortly after that, that's when it kicked the power out. Well, when the power went out, I started receiving a text on my phone. It was Captain Greg Kozloff, and he said his home had just been blown away and he couldn't get in touch with the police department. My wife and I got in the car and we started down McFarland trying to get towards over at Forest Lakes where he lived, and we were trying to get to that area, and traffic was completely backed up past DCH, and I had to turn around at that time. But I had gotten in touch with some of the ones at the police department and let them know that Captain Kozloff's home had been destroyed, but they were okay, but Forest Lake had got hit real heavily. I started checking to see, because the tornado came right over the area. It came right over 359. We were at 29th Street, and Greensboro Avenue was the location of the Salvation Army. So I started trying to call people that was at the Salvation Army, and finally I made contact, and we had got completely blown away. We were very fortunate. It was right before everyone had checked in, and we had one employee that received head injury that seemed to be getting better, but later passed away. But that was the only injury that we had at the Salvation Army site.
I was lucky. I was on campus in Graves Hall where I taught, and of course the university had closed or had sent students home and canceled classes, but many of us remained just doing work in our offices and sort of writing it out, so to speak. I was on the 3rd floor working in my office with my secretary, and we both, again, heard the sirens and did not pay a lot of attention to it initially and just continued to work. And I remember she approached me and said, "You know, we might better get in the basement. This sounds more serious than any other warning before." And so we did. We got in the basement with other colleagues and watched it actually on a laptop, someone's laptop, with the weather, and knew that it was nearby, and actually at one time thought it was heading towards campus as they were predicting. So it was very scary. I remember someone, after we thought it had passed or knew that it had passed, in fact the sun came out initially right afterwards, and so someone approached me and told me that my neighborhood had been destroyed. And I got very emotional and immediately ran out of the building to get to my car to try to get to my neighborhood. And one of my colleagues lived next door, and someone had told me that his wife and children were at home when it hit, so I was very concerned for them and their safety. So yeah, I immediately drove to that neighborhood, to Glendale Gardens. It was terrible. Traffic was backed up, police were everywhere. I couldn't get close enough in my car, so I just remember pulling over on Hargrove Road and running. And the police, once I told them that I lived in that neighborhood, they didn't even try to stop me. They just said, be careful, and let me go in.
Right.
But of course the street was completely covered with debris and trees, and I eventually made it through all of that to my house, and was of course completely in shock to see what I found. Well, from actually my street is a dead-end street, and from my house on forward to the rest of the street was completely destroyed. Now my house was not completely destroyed. It was the last one still standing, and then from there down was complete destruction. I mean, you couldn't even tell it was a neighborhood.
Right.
My house was actually moved off its I guess foundation, and one end was swollen. Once I got inside, I could see that one end of the house was swollen and pulled away from the house, so I could go in, but all the windows were broken, and of course water was everywhere, and but not as bad as some of the other homes.
My name is Melvin Vines. I'm county administrator. We were looking out the window. I was looking out the window of my office here. We began to see the wind change, began to see the trees start to move, and you could see the tornado moving through the south part of the city out the window, and we could see the track of it. And of course we had many people taking shelter, and I knew when I saw it that it was probably close to my personal home, but I couldn't leave the courthouse at that time. So it was nearly dark that night before I was able to leave the courthouse, and as I traveled down 15th Street, I didn't see any damage on the part of 15th Street that I was on off of Greensboro. And I lived in Wood Manor off the Hargrove Road, but when I turned on to Hackberry Lane and then turned off of Hackberry Lane to get into Wood Manor, I began to see major damage, telephone poles, light poles across the road, houses damaged. I had to park at the University Place School. When I walked into my neighborhood, which was just one of many neighborhoods that was affected, I saw major damage. I saw my house was completely destroyed. I started looking for my neighbors whose houses were destroyed, and went from house to house calling for them. But the tornado had been over probably 2 to 3 hours by that time, and couldn't find any of my neighbors. I was quite concerned about them. But what struck me in the area I was in is you could hear sirens in the background, but all the road, Hargrove Road, was blocked with trees and limbs and power lines across it. So there were no first responders, there were no law enforcement or fire officials in the area. When I got there 2 or 3 hours perhaps after the tornado, it was deathly silent. You could just hear a pin drop. There were people walking around the neighborhood somewhat in shock, but I couldn't find any injured neighbors, and as God would have it, all of my neighbors were away from home when the tornado hit. One neighbor was at home and was going to go and get his mother-in-law, who lived up the street, to come to their house, which is next door to my house, and thinking that their house was a more sturdy house than the mother-in-law's house up the street. And the neighbor got a call to go to Birmingham to meet his daughter, who was flying in from out of town. So he was on the way to Birmingham when the tornado hit his house, and he did not get his mother-in-law. His mother-in-law's house sustained damage up the street, but had he not got that unexpected call and gone to Birmingham, he would have gotten his mother-in-law and they would have been in the house, and it was just completely leveled. The neighbor's house next door had a double bricked wall around the swimming pool, 2 bricks on each side, and it was leveled down to the ground and just nothing left standing. The house across the street from that was. I had a few walls in my house that was left standing. But it was deathly silent, and the smell of natural gas was permeating all over the neighborhood. My gas meter was gone, and it was spewing gas, and so I knew there was a chance of an explosion. But everyone directly around my house happened to be not at home and had survived it. And so I came back to the courthouse after that, and started calling the gas company, and it took me a long time to get through to the gas company, but finally got through, and they said that they would cut the gas off in large areas of the city, and they appreciated my call. I thought it was a miracle that there wasn't any fires with that much natural gas. Stayed at the courthouse until probably midnight, and then went back to a country home that I have in Foster's, Alabama. Spent the night and stayed in it until we could get things under control here at the courthouse. One of the interesting things is my son's wedding picture. It was in his bedroom at home. He was married, and someone in Hoax Bluff, Alabama, found his picture. It was pulled out of the frame, and part of the corner was cut off. But that's myself and my son in the wedding picture, and that's probably 150 miles from Tuscaloosa, and it was not water damaged or destroyed. The frame was gone, but that was an interesting thing that happened to us. And also, I had a cat that lived in and out of the house, and I could not find my cat. And for days I could not find my cat, but I put a little food and water out for it, and something started eating the food and water. And probably 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an animal trap and put out there and started putting the food in the animal trap, and I trapped my cat. And she had somehow survived the tornado that had been around for 2 or 3 days, eating what I had put out. Where she was, or whether she got blown a distance and walked back, I don't know, but my little cat survived the tornado with the house completely destroyed to that extent.
Again, I'm Chief Meteorologist Richard Scott, just now joining us. We're watching a very deadly, large tornado coming right towards the University of Alabama campus.
We got Chris on the phone. Let's go to him real quick. All right,
Chris, we got him on the phone.
Chris,
yes, we're here.
Talk to us.
Wedge tornado coming in at Tuscaloosa.
We have the tornado on the ground. It's inside, probably about 1.5 miles from us right now. It looks like it's going to go just north of the interstate. Looks like it's actually going to come around the University Mall, so everybody in that area needs to take cover. DCH needs to take cover too.
All right, this thing's coming right towards the University of Alabama campus. We're going to stay on air as long as we possibly can. We're getting power glitches. Again, I'm Chief Meteorologist Richard Scott. We're watching a deadly situation for the city of Whenever we lost power, I knew where the tornado was. I lived behind the old Big Lots and Hobby Lobby, just a couple of miles east of campus. And based off where the tornado was, I knew that, hey, this has got to be close to my home. And I bought the home about 10 months before the tornado hit. And, I left my weekend guy here, said, hey, stay here in case we get power back. And I took off, and I had to stop by DCH and pull over on the side of the road. I couldn't go any further. And at that point, I was on McFarland looking down 13th Street East, and I could actually see where my neighborhood was because all the big trees there. It was a very forested area. All the trees were torn down, and you could see, a long way off, and it just totally, it was an unreal experience. I was there probably 10 minutes after the tornado passed. There were people still coming out of the rubble of their homes, and just hearing people screaming and crying and yelling people's names, trying to find, whoever they were with, their loved ones. And but the smells was what was so strange. You had a strong smell of like pine sap. There are a lot of pine trees there. You had the smell of mud. It was like a thick cake of mud smell in the air. Natural gas, that was another big smell I noticed. And because it was beside Big Lots and Hobby Lobby, I smelled a strong, it would choke you, the smell of soap, which was interesting, but I didn't think about it until after the fact. Well, of course, that's Big Lots and Hobby Lobby. That's why it smelled like that in that area. But all those smells still just haunt me to this day. Remembering that, and hopefully, gosh, I never experienced anything like it. But another deal about it, when you're in the middle of that tornado path and you look 360 degrees around you and all you see is destruction, you just hear this constant buzz of sirens of police and ambulances, and it's just unreal. But I kept going. I walked down 13th Street East. It was about a mile walk, and I still had my suit on, had my microphone on and everything from coverage, and found where my house was. Our director at the TV station at the time, he was actually staying there, and he was there, and that scared me, was what I was going to find. Is he going to be alive? Because I knew he was at the house when the tornado hit, and I made it to my neighborhood, and it took me a little while to realize where I was because I was kind of lost. All the trees, all the objects, the houses I'm used to looking at before it turned into my neighborhood were gone. The only reason I knew I was at the entrance of my neighborhood was because of the speed table. I remember that speed table. I'd have to hit it every day going to work. And then I looked around me. I'm like, my God, this is my neighborhood. You know, everything's gone basically. I mean, all the structures are beyond repair. They're destroyed essentially, and all these people are just coming out of the rubble of their house, and it's just an unreal experience. But the guy that was there at the time, he was okay. He did what he was supposed to do. We always tell people, hey, you know, get in a closet or a bathroom. And he got in the bathroom. He got down in the bathtub, and he survived the tornado. If he was anywhere else in the house, I don't know if that would have happened. In fact, talking to him after the tornado, he was sitting on the couch about 20 or 30 seconds before the tornado hit. Debris started hitting the house whenever he realized, uh-oh, I got to do something. Took off to the bathroom. That's when the roof went, the windows went, and everything basically got sucked out. The couch wasn't even in the house anymore. The couch he was sitting on, it got sucked out through the roof and through the back side of the house. So if he was still sitting there, I don't know where he would have been. He probably would have got pulled out of the house. In which, you know, if you get pulled out of a house during a tornado, the chance of surviving is very low. It happens, but it's not a good chance.
Right.
Fortunately, he was okay. But it was kind of weird because I was trying to get back to the TV station. Like, we got to get back because if we get power, there's tornadoes everywhere. We got to get back on air. We didn't get power back through the event, but when we got back to the TV station, that's when it kind of hit me. I'm like, my God, where do I go now? You know, I can't go home. You know, what I do? I'm just immediately homeless. Fortunately, I had plenty of friends and family nearby, and they were able to help a lot. So, but that was just a weird experience, and it took about 4 months before found a new home. And at that point, we just kind of restarted our life. I got married not long after that. My wife and I have a little boy now, and we just slowly have moved on. It's taken a while, and we still have just nightmares of this. But, you know, we're just trying to get back to normal.
Hey, I'm Judson Miller.
I'm Preston Miller.
And we both did search and rescue as well as cleanup after the April 27th tornado. I remember being very scared. You know, you hear about tornadoes, especially living in Tuscaloosa. You know, you kind of grow up knowing where to go and what to do. But it'd been a while since we'd seen one come right through the middle of town. In fact, I can't remember a time at all that it hit such a densely populated area in my lifetime. So it was really a shock. You know, I had no clue what to expect. Just knew we had to go.
I've always hated tornadoes. They're my least favorite thing ever, especially after 2000. One of them came right behind our house, and I was actually being sucked out of the basement when that happened. So tornadoes are my least favorite things. Never like them.
What made you guys decide to go and start doing search and rescue after the Tuscaloosa tornado had passed?
Just figured any extra body they had out there searching for people was maybe one extra person that could be found and saved, or if we could take some first aid cases that were maybe less severe, so that somebody that had better training could actually go out there and find somebody that needed some more severe training.
Yeah, that's exactly my thoughts. You know, we were on opposite ends of town, and my first thought was, you know, I need to get out there and help. You know, that's part of being a Boy Scout. You know, you got to be prepared, but you also, you know, got to do your good turn daily. So we, from opposite ends of town, packed up and headed into town.
Describe what it was like when you got to the first area where the tornado had just passed.
It was completely mind-blowing. I had no clue what to expect on the way in. I was coming in from Northport, and as soon as I crossed the bridge, everything was shut down. So I parked on the side of the road, grabbed my first aid kit and my backpack, and just started hiking towards the hospital. And it was just kind of surreal seeing, I knew Krispy Kreme was there, I knew Chuck E. Cheese was there, but they were just big piles of rubble. So it was kind of almost like a bad dream. I had no clue, really had to process it all. So thankfully, just kind of muscle memory reflex took over and just started kind of getting to work, looking through everything.
I was coming from Cottondale at the time, and we actually had everything in the truck ready to go, or axes in case we had to cut down a door, first aid kits and backpacks and extra water bottles and snacks and stuff like that. And we actually stopped a little early, more down on Veterans Memorial, because we thought that was the worst spot. And we just drove around for a second and oh no, this isn't the worst spot, continue on farther. And once we got, we parked in the University Mall parking lot and walked across the street to where what is now Midtown, that kind of area. It used to be a neighborhood, and it was just gone. And we just started going from foundation slab to foundation slab, just seeing if there's anything we could do.
All right, guys, how many days after the tornado did y'all continue to do search and rescue?
We actually did it for about a week afterwards. The first 2 days, there's no cell service, so I really had no clue what the other side of town looked like, Cottondale side, which is where Preston and my family lived. So it was kind of scary for that time being. But on the third day, we actually were able to get together. I was able to get through, make sure they're okay, and we decided to meet up. So Preston and I got together, and by that time, it wasn't really a kind of a search and rescue mentality. It was more of a let's start cleaning up. So we carried in chainsaw, axes, again first aid kits and water, and started cleaning up. Getting trees off people's houses. Kind of helping make sense of it all. And that was the hard part. All these people. You really start to see the faces of the people that have been displaced. They're saying, we need, if you can cut this tree off, we greatly appreciate it. So just being able to help those people was huge at least for me.
It was a little bit more active after that second day. I wasn't able to really use my hands for about the week after because I had so many blisters. I had completely worn through 2 pair of work gloves with the axe and the chainsaws.
The mass destruction was somewhat unbelievable. I have a chart here that shows there were 4,724 homes affected on that day in Tuscaloosa County. 2,375 homes were destroyed. My home was one of the 2,375 destroyed. I have a picture here of my home before the tornado, and then a picture taken after the tornado, and as you can see, it was totally destroyed.
So that was definitely a very, very bad tornado, man.
I actually had muted myself. That was definitely one that not only was for the record books and the city of Tuscaloosa, but for the state in general. It was one of the things about that day, and this Tuscaloosa tornado is just a perfect representation of how that day went. Is usually we don't get those type of picturesque tornadoes. Usually ours are the rain wrapped. You can't really see it. If you can see it, it's only for a brief period. These are the ones that you see out in the plains all the time, and they were just out wide in the open, which actually helped us, I think, on the weather side of things, because we could be like, hey, actually, look, here it is. There it is. It's coming right down your path. And what we've learned, especially since that time, throughout the weather field, doing some research, some social interaction and stuff with people, is that they respond more to visualization. It's one thing to see it on the radar, and you can see the velocity couplet. We can show you the debris signature and all that stuff. But there's something that happens in people's minds that when they actually see it on air live, actually doing damage, they respond to it a lot better. And
Yes.
so that was one of the good things that if we could say anything good about that day, it was the fact that we could actually see these very visually and be like, this is what's coming right down your street. And I think that actually helped out a lot of people to be like, oh, well, there it is. It's actually happening this time. We got to actually do something.
Well, let's go on ahead now and play another video that I've got talking about the recovery and the aftermath of the Tuscaloosa tornado on April the 27th, 10 years ago today.
We went to our backup location on the university campus where we operated for a couple of days till we could move to a more roomier facility, and that was at the Alabama Fire College. They had some space that was not being utilized. So, as we got to the university facility, we were starting to get information on the damage in the rest of the city and portions of the county. But late afternoon and into the early evening, there was still just a lot of damage assessment being done because you had so many areas throughout the city and the county that with trees down, you got to clear the trees safely, because when you've got power lines wrapped in trees, are they energized or not? You don't know. So, the first many hours are trying to get that damage assessment, as well as people were working still in the search and rescue mode, because this is a huge county. It's bigger. When the tide's out, it's really, let me rephrase that. When the tide is in, Baldwin County is larger land-wise. I got that one backwards. When the tide is in, we're larger than Baldwin County. When the tide is out, Baldwin County is the largest land-wise. Well, you look at the path of that tornado going all the way through Tuscaloosa County. Now, in the end, we were rated with 2 EF3 and 2 EF4 tornadoes. There's a lot of discussion that the afternoon tornado that went through Tuscaloosa was an EF5. I don't know. The Weather Service, and we've talked to them about it a number of times, the damage they saw, but they didn't see everything, was not of an EF5 nature, but it was a definite high-end EF4. Part of the challenge, though, was some of the structures that were destroyed, people started rebuilding so quickly that later when they came back to look, the debris had been cleared, that they'd started rebuilding. So that's some of the challenge later on. But you had damage just from one end of the county to the other, in areas that you wouldn't suspect that we had damage. A lot of people, I don't think, realize that we had several houseboats sunk on the whole lake. People don't realize some of the rural areas that were heavily impacted with the storm, or some of the other industry. Perhaps the best known issues that we have because of this was we lost a significant portion of our affordable housing in the Alberta area as well as the Holt area. And one of the challenges is people don't build low-end housing or low-end apartments. Apparently the profit margin is not there, so where do people that lost their low-end housing, where do they go? Where do you find places? So, as we see a lot of apartment buildings, we really don't see a lot of moderately priced units coming online. So that's one of the challenges today.
Well, I finally found a guy with a track hoe to come down and remove the tree, cut it up, and get the house tore down, and the bulldozer just pushed it all off. And I was fortunate enough to find a good home builder who started right away, and it didn't take but 3 or 4 months, and we had our new house.
How long did it take you guys to clear off and completely rebuild the Salvation Army?
Well, quite a while, not necessarily so long to clear off, but Salvation Army did not have adequate amount of money to replace our building. We had a 69-bed facility, and the insurance that Salvation Army had on us was not enough to replace that building. So we had to go to work as a board and raise the money. So it took us from April the 27th, 2011 to get everything cleared off, to raise the money and get the other building built. We moved in February of 2016. So about 5 years. We had our groundbreaking in April the 27th, 2016. So we had 5 years to actually get back in our building and run. We turned it, instead of facing Greensboro Avenue, we turned it facing 29th Street. We built it larger. There's a 73-bed facility there now. We built a family unit in it that we didn't have before. We built the ground up. We had a lot of drainage problems there from the old building, and we built that up. So we spent about $6 million. But during the meantime, we were doing services. We never stopped serving our veterans. We rented some homes. We had them in the VA for a while, and then we rented some homes on Crescent Ridge Road and had veterans out there. We continued our day-to-day operations. We were very fortunate. The gentleman that owned Books A Million let us have his building for a few months. It was in Northport next to Taco Casa. We were able to house our folks out of that area for a while. But then he had to have his building back, and we bought the old River Hill printing building and turned that into our administrative offices, where we would give out money and food and for places to stay and stuff like that.
I did not build back. Myself and 7 other property owners in the area, the subdivision that we lived in, decided all of our houses were destroyed. Decided that the property probably had a higher and better use for something other than residential homes. It's in the center of Tuscaloosa, and there were also some issues with the flood zone in that area because of the federal flood insurance program zones. And so we all banded together as a group and sold the property all as one block of property. And apartments are on it now, apartments and townhomes.
It was problematic. My insurance company put me in a condo, a townhouse, until decisions could be made, and it finally was determined months later that my house was too damaged to be repaired. And so, however, the night before I was going to have it demolished, someone bought it. Someone called me and said, "Oh, we want it, and we want the lot and the house still on it." So I was thrilled for that to happen, and so someone purchased it, and I ended up buying something in North.
So, very good stories there,
Yes.
to a very bad ending there in Tuscaloosa, nonetheless.
Yeah, and that's one of the good things is, you go through, people went through this tornado, went through hell and back. I mean,
Yes.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You don't want to go through that stuff. But aftermath, to be able to hear all the stories of not only survival, but how people, helped each other, not just after the storm, but even during the storm. I've heard stories from a couple friends of mine who they heard it through some of their friends that people in Tuscaloosa, before the tornado started coming through, rushing to get these, either their friends that they know is, not really paying attention, or their loved ones, some of the elderly, and hey, we need to, go do this and stuff, and it saved their lives. And that's one of the things that I know a lot of us in the weather community have been kind of hitting the head on lately is if you aren't personally affected by this, you can still do your part in letting other people know, hey, this is coming. Hey, you need to take cover. You could be the one to save their life potentially. It could be that, if I didn't call a friend of mine and let them know the tornado was coming right towards their area, now they're dead, and I could have done something about it. So that's why we're trying to, kind of get this thing going to be, hey, you be that person's savior for the day. You can do that. You can make a difference. I honestly wish that I could stand up there, or Ashley Gann or any of our weather team at CBS 42 could stand up there and individually call out everybody on a street or something, and do it that way. I wish we could do that. I wish we were able to do a lot of stuff to help people, but we can't because of technology. But that's where you guys come in. I mean, if you need to, be a part of this. We're one part of everything. When it comes to severe weather coverage, it's us, the Weather Service, the EMA people, the storm spotters and chasers, and it's you. We're all involved in this together. And when everything is working and clicking, that's when the best case scenarios can come out. And so that's just one of the things that, talking about this aftermath of this horrible day, the good news that came out of it just made things just so much better.
And we have 3 segments left. We apologize that it's going a little bit longer, but, it is a 10-year special, so we have to cover everything. So we are going to talk about now what haunts a lot of people about that day.
I wouldn't say I have nightmares. I did experience something that was unusual for a meteorologist to experience. When we were on the interstate looking at the tornado, I was on the telephone to James Spann, and he had me my live audio on the air with him. What I learned about 6 months later was that there was a family in Cordova who they were listening to television, and they heard me talking with James. They knew exactly where I was located because I was referring to the Cordova exit that was 1 mile away from me. They knew that tornado was approaching them. And what they did was, because of what they heard me saying, they sought shelter. They lived in a double-wide mobile home, but they sought shelter in their underground shelter. So as a meteorologist, at that point, I'd had probably 48 years experience. It was really a breathtaking moment to find out that these people had actually sought shelter based on the words that I gave and basically saved their lives directly. As a meteorologist, I put out many a tornado warning in the National Weather Service, but never had I been absolutely positive that my warning or my words reached anyone and actually saved lives. And that was a very powerful moment to meet that family.
Thankfully not. I think because it was so surreal to me, I was able to kind of process it and move through. I do occasionally have a nightmare about a tornado or two, but it's not too bad. But now that I know exactly how dangerous they are, it definitely makes me respect it a lot more.
Starting off, like the first year or two, I had a lot more nightmares. Like I would have moments where like it was really bad. But as time's gone, it's kind of, I still think about it a lot. And whenever somebody tries to like talk to me about it, like it kind of gets to me a little bit more, but it's not as bad. I can just kind of brush it off. But the nightmares still every now and then will get to me.
Probably what bothers me the most is the fact that in Alabama over 250 people died. In the Tuscaloosa area, nearly 60 people were killed. I don't know what I could have done different. Could I have done something different? Could I have said something different maybe for people to take the warning more serious and to go to a safe place? I just don't know. And after looking at some of the damage, I mean, I don't know if it was a situation where there's just nowhere they could go unless they had an underground storm shelter. Most homes were basically wiped off a foundation. I guess maybe that's why so many people died, but that's what bothers me the most, and that I remember the most of this day is how many people died in a day where technology and the warning system was incredible. Let me give you an example. For Tuscaloosa, there's a tornado emergency issued for Tuscaloosa over 60 minutes before the tornado hit. At 4 o'clock, the National Weather Service issued the first tornado emergency. It's one of two for Tuscaloosa. And they issued a new tornado emergency maybe 30 minutes after that. But the first one included Tuscaloosa, and that was over 60 minutes. So it's not that we didn't have warning. It's just I don't know if the damage was so significant that people couldn't survive it, or if people just didn't take it serious. I don't know.
That day was our finest day, and it was our worst day. The number that will always be in my mind is 252. That's how many people died in one day on my watch, and that is inexcusable. I mean inexcusable for anybody, the public, for anybody in the weather enterprise. So we have to be better at social science. So we have gone to social scientists and learned so much from them over the past 6 years. So next time we have a day like that, which will be after I'm gone, but even the next time we have one tornado, we'll be better.
So, what haunts you about that day?
Along with my colleagues there, Richard and James, the death toll. I mean, looking back at it, I completely get and agree with Richard's statement. Is that I think that most of the deaths did occur from the bigger tornadoes. And I think the problem was that they really needed to be underground. It's just like we were talking with Mike earlier on in the show. There's one thing you can stay. That's why I keep telling people when we deal with these big tornadoes, is like it's one thing to have an EF0, 1, 2, even a 3 to some extent, to where you can be in a closet, you can be in your bathtub, you can be in the most interior room of your home, a site-built home, and you'll more than likely be just fine. But once you get into the EF4s, especially the higher end EF4s and then the EF5s, if you're on a site-built home or business or even a school, and to some extent, that's just going to wipe off the foundation. All that's going to be left is a slab. And so what happens when you're in the home with that, you're going with the debris. You are not going to be left on that slab. You're going to be tossed miles down the road, up in the air, who knows, and the chances of survival of that is very, very slim. So I say that number definitely haunts me, but I look at it with a sense of, yeah, we probably could have done more. We didn't really, us in the weather enterprise at that point, didn't really focus a lot on the social side of things. The April 27th outbreak really opened our eyes to we really need to be more social oriented to some things. And it's not that we weren't out of just ignorance. It was that we all up until that point, a lot of the stuff on the weather enterprise, especially the broadcast side of things, was more technical. It was more, here's A, B, and C, straightforward. But we did things more on the technical side of things. That's just the way meteorology works. It's a science. It has mathematics and all that stuff in it. And what we didn't really realize is that there was a big disconnect between the viewer and us. And it took that outbreak, unfortunately, to make us realize there's a big disconnect here. And so that's why you started seeing the Storm Prediction Center. They started kind of revamping their outlooks, because up to that point, the outlooks was for us. It really wasn't for the public to look at. Thanks to the internet, they actually realized, oh, that Storm Prediction Center, this is interesting. And so we all started changing things to have more of a social side. And it really, really helped things. But I would say, to answer your question, that number is the one that haunts me the most. And I say that, I know I was a senior in high school. I wasn't a part of any severe weather coverage that day. I was, still very, very early on in my understanding of the weather. And, I hadn't gone to, having college classes and stuff later on. But it's, I look back at it like, yeah, I know there's probably definitely some people in there that we really couldn't help, because they were doing what they were told to do, which was get into their most interior room, and an EF4, EF5 tornado came through, and there's nothing you do. You had to be underground for that. So I'd say that's what haunts me the most.
All right, well, let's go to our next segment, and actually, everybody is going to answer that question for you.
I think that the number of fatalities is related to a number of different reasons. One of those is the fact that we had so many violent tornadoes. I often put it in terms that people I think can understand. If you add up all the tornado tracks only in the state of Alabama and you put them all together, you would have one track that's 1,100 miles long. That's a lot of miles. Then when you divide it out, and let's just use EF3s, 4s, and 5s. When you divide that out, the vast majority of that 1,100 miles are violent and strong tornadoes. So I think the death toll is a combination of things. We know that some people don't listen to warnings and don't heed the warnings and don't seek shelter. We understand that there are some people that do that. That probably contributed to it. But one of the things I often ask is, what would have happened if there had been no warnings? And I think the distribution and information, the social media, the television, radio, everything that happened, I think the death toll could have been 2,000 instead of 252. Now 252 is a terrible thing. We wish it had been, just 3 or 4. But when you look at the magnitude of the overall events that occurred, it begs the question sometimes is why weren't the number of deaths even higher than they were? And I think the reason that they weren't higher is because people did heed warnings. People were aware. The fact that forecasts for a week had been talking about the potential for severe weather. So while I'm unhappy that the death toll was 252, I really am thankful that it was not what I think it could have been with the overall magnitude of that event.
I think that most people did not ignore the warning because if you go back and look at especially a lot of the video, people were off the streets, there wasn't a lot of activity, so I think everybody had heeded the messaging. I think that the warnings were good. There was 63 minutes lead time for the actual city limits of Tuscaloosa. So I think the lead times were all appropriate, and I think the run-up to the event itself, as far as the messaging of how this day is going to be particularly bad, was all in place and good as well. So I think you hit on a point there. I think it was probably just a very violent situation going through a metropolitan area. I mean, we had 65 fatalities with that entire track, considering that it was borderline EF4 to EF5. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to fathom. 190 miles an hour coming through a major metro area and only having 65 fatalities. Not to lessen the fact that we had fatalities, but at the same time, at some of those storms, you have to be in a very substantial shelter, obviously.
I really think we had a decent response, and it's very unfortunate that we lost as many lives as we did. We won't ever know how many lives were saved by the warnings that we issued. That's the hard part about the job. We only hear the bad news. We don't get to hear the success stories. I think we're fortunate that there weren't more fatalities. The storm track was wide. It was on the ground for such a long distance that I think we're fortunate that we only had that number of fatalities that we did.
We all have work to do, and in the weather enterprise, in 2011, the false alarm ratio was 80. 80% of tornado warnings were false alarms, and that leads to the cry wolf syndrome. In the research done after the event, we heard this over and over in the verbatims. I hear warnings all the time, but nothing ever happens. In that false alarm rate, cry wolf, people didn't do anything, and I don't blame them. That's just human nature. So we had to challenge ourselves, and I'm proud to say today the FAR has dropped from 80 in 2011 down to 20 where it is today. I never thought we'd be that good, but we had to go back to basic science, and the Weather Service in Birmingham, based on great work and great studies, they've got that sucker knocked down. But in 2011 it cost us. That did cost lives. No.
Well, Taylor, I think now, since we've been talking about that, we need to end on a positive note.
Yeah, and let me just make one more quick note on what they're talking about. James makes a perfect point there. The false alarm ratio was very, very high coming up to 2011. And, I get questions every now and then, especially with friends of mine who are weather enthusiasts lately with, weather surfing in Birmingham. Hey, why isn't there a tornado warning on this? That looks pretty impressive. Hey, why isn't there a warning on this? And yeah, it looks pretty impressive, but what they have done, I honestly still believe to this day that the Weather Service office in Birmingham is the best office in the entire nation and really the entire world. What they have done is they had a high false alarm ratio, and James makes a good point that day probably did cost some lives because people getting that year was so active. And Richard had talked about it, that there had been multiple severe weather events already that year, especially just a couple weeks before or a week before this happened. And so people, if they're under warning all these times and nothing happened in their home, well, they kind of get fatigued. Oh, here we go again. Just nothing could happen. And then there comes the tornado. So that false alarm ratio was high. But what the Weather Service in Birmingham has done is what James said. They're going back to the basics. That we can get so caught up. And I get caught up in this. Everybody in the weather community gets caught up in this, especially the broadcast field. Even National Weather Service meteorologists do. We get sucked into the model data. We get sucked into all this other stuff. We forget about our expertise, our training, our education, and you get caught up in it, and it can bite you in the butt. And there's been a lot of times where it's like, oh, I'm getting caught up too much in the model data. Got to back away. And what they did is they went back to the basics, and they looked at, at what point, velocity-wise, does a tornado really start to develop? And it will vary from day to day. And I can get into a big detail about that, but I'm not going to. But there's a great article that was done, or tweet thread that one of my colleagues in Mississippi did, talking about the warning process. And they went back to all that stuff. They went all the way back to the the basics about it. And there's these storms that people will ask me, why wasn't there a tornado warning on this? And my response would be, the velocity was good, but was there a tornado? No, I don't think so. There you go. So it does. They've done a fantastic job. I have the utmost respect for them and every Weather Service office meteorologist. But to this day, the Weather Service in Birmingham, they've got it covered. They do the best that I've ever seen lately.
Here is our last segment, folks. What you will take away from this event.
I think the most important thing that I learned is the people of Tuscaloosa County are resilient, and they are compassionate, and when a tragedy like that strikes, they all banded together. Everybody came together and worked together in harmony. And I had people who were total strangers coming through our neighborhood, giving food items out and asking if they could help. Could they help clean up? Was anyone injured? And it was just overwhelming, the generosity and the uplift of humanity that happened after that tornado in Tuscaloosa County.
I think what many probably took from it, and that is to take warning very seriously now, and to take all precautions and to be careful when severe weather is coming. And when they warn you that it's coming, to get ready.
Even though it was a really bad situation, I think that I definitely grew as a person. And being able to get out in the community and really help out definitely did a lot for me. You band together with those people that you're next to, and every bad situation can be made good in that way. So thankfully, I was able to help out and feel like I actually made a difference with it as well.
I feel like it really brought our town together as a whole, and we're still much stronger now than we were before. Like when you see somebody, if you see somebody that you maybe helped or maybe was along your side, you just kind of have a connection now. It kind of makes a brotherhood.
Okay, and finally, now after you saw what April 27th can bring, when a tornado warning is issued, do you react differently?
Definitely. 100% differently. Before, unless we really saw the tornado coming, we didn't bunker down, didn't respect the polygon per se. But now, as soon as Span starts taking his jacket off, we are ready to go. Everybody's got their helmets, safety plan. Go ahead and throw the go bag in the truck just in case we do need to go back in and help. Radio's got good batteries in it. Flashlights have batteries. I definitely am more respectful when I'm told to, get to your safe place. That's for sure.
I've always been skittish of tornadoes, so not really much has changed. It's just I know it can come after a lot better now. So.
Well, there's a lot of takeaways from this event. There's no doubt about that. Probably one of the biggest memories is that was the very first significant tornado I'd ever seen. So that is a tremendous memory that is permanently embedded in my memory cells. I'll also take away the fact that this was a tremendous event in terms of the overall magnitude. And probably one I won't see again in my career, but I can't say it won't happen. But when you look at 32, 74, and 2011, we have a major event, an outbreak type event, on average about every 40 years. And so, we need to make sure that the next generation of meteorologists is prepared for that next event in about 40 years, around 2051, plus or minus 2 or 3 years.
Community and communities. The way that the state of Alabama responded to the disaster, the individuals volunteering, our colleagues with the Emergency Management Agency, the first responders bonding together, helping each other out. Even within our office, going through a disaster like that, the people that were employed here at the time, we have a bond that will never be shaken or broken, that we went through that event together. To see the response and the humanity of people dropping their allegiances to their university or race, color, creed, working together to help people was, I guess, the sweet part of the bittersweet event that I will remember and appreciate and take with me.
Probably just like you said, the idea of looking live at a situation like that. I think that was the first time I'd ever seen something live, seen it happening right in front of my eyes. So I think that's probably the bigger takeaway from me. A lot of people here had obviously strong emotions and strong feelings about it, and so I'll certainly always remember those. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was just seeing something happen live for the first time while we were warning for it.
I think there are several things. One, and let me go back, this community, you not only had your EMA office destroyed, you had your Salvation Army destroyed, and that was the shelter for homeless. Mm-hmm. You had your Red Cross facility destroyed and a lot of the supplies for initially establishing shelter. We had a area of damage that went basically from one end of the county to the other. Perhaps the biggest thing that we continue to talk about is diversity in where our assets are. There's a new emergency management office being built, which is part of the new consolidated 911 center. That will be bunkered underground. Of course, antennas are above ground and subject to weather, but the facility itself is hardened with backup power. But we're keeping a backup location in this building as well, having that redundancy. We have stuff stored in a variety of locations now rather than one storage facility, so that if one facility is damaged, there's stuff elsewhere, not all of your eggs in one basket. So I think that is perhaps the biggest lesson is spread your stuff out. And sometimes it's kind of hard to do. The other part is Tuscaloosa is a great community, and you look at some of the things that were done as a result of we are I think, a resilient community, and people come together. You look at how many people at the hospital treated in surge capacity. You look at how city crews worked well outside of their job description doing things. You look at what the city shop did to put equipment on the road to continue garbage service. Was it in the standard condition we would like? No, but you have to continue providing those services. So much was done, so much was innovative on the spot. People working together with a common cause. Nobody can predict when the next catastrophe will occur, but most are not that catastrophic unless it's your house, your business. Most are not on the level of April 27, 2011. Most are much more manageable, but realizing that there will be some that aren't, and having volunteers, that's the other part that's always a challenge, is volunteers want to volunteer the day off or the day after. But you need trained volunteers, and they're never enough. You've got organizations from Red Cross, Salvation Army, Civil Air Patrol, Emergency Management, you name it, that use volunteers. And the volunteers need to be trained, and now's the time to do that. You always have a need for volunteers to staff shelters, but you've got a disaster that doesn't require a shelter being open. You've got damage assessment that needs to be done. People need to be trained in doing that. And that doesn't happen on the hood of the vehicle as you start the damage assessment. You need to do that ahead of time.
Well, Taylor, I hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed this, I guess you would say, anniversary special. And I know we went a little bit over, or a lot over, but it was a lot to cover. And man, I got to tell you what, we covered a lot.
We did, and it's one of those days that I will forever remember. It's actually it affected me personally. Our house never got impacted by severe weather that day. We had a couple tornado warnings that we were under polygon wise, but we never saw damage from any of the storms. But it changed my outlook on things and also my career path. So I mentioned that I was a senior in high school that year. Literally 2 days from now is my birthday. I'll turn 28 on the 29th. And so I was 17. Well, thank you. I was 17 years old when this happened. 2 days later, I turned 18. And I'd always been a weather enthusiast ever since I was little. I mean, my parents would tell me stories when I was about 3, 4 years old that, I was already fascinated by the clouds and by the weather and stuff. But once I got to like a senior in high school, I started kind of thinking, maybe I want to do more business administration, or, there's, some other little things that I kind of was thinking more be a career choice. And I thought, maybe the weather will be more of a hobby thing, just kind of watch it, big weather events, I'll watch it, stuff like that, or maybe get a side job somehow. But what happened after that day, I posted about this on Facebook earlier for anybody who are friends of mine on Facebook, that when that day happened, I was glued to the TV, especially when I got home from school. And I mean, I didn't take my eyes off it until we lost power at about 4:30 or so, and didn't have power for a week. And so I had always known that there was broadcast meteorologists were important. I already knew that, but it didn't really dawn on me and just how important it actually is. It became very much more clear to me that, okay, this is a life. During these events, it's almost basically, we have people's lives in our hands to some extent. And it just dawned on me that's how important it is. And after a couple of days after the tornadoes happened, the church that we went to back when I was a senior in high school, one of our sister churches up in Harvest, the United Methodist Church up there near Sparkman High School, got hit by that EF5 tornado. And that's the first time I've ever seen tornado damage in my life. Better yet, up close. And just not driving by, but actually in the thick of things, helping take things out of rubble and stuff like that. And I remember specifically walking. You couldn't park. I don't remember. I don't think you could park at the church. You had to park down the street because there was a lot of damage. And I remember walking up and seeing somehow this tree had survived. Obviously, the tornado had directly gone over there. But there is this huge pine tree, and almost all the limbs were gone to some extent, but there's some really high up still. And I remember specifically seeing an SUV. And I knew it was an SUV because it was one of the what's the one with the Chevy has, the Suburban. It was one of the Suburbans. It was what was left of a full Suburban up on the very tip top of this tree, where that had parts wrapped around the cab. You could still see the cab was there, and it was up on the top of this tree. And my first thought in my mind was, good Lord, how does that even happen? How does that how could something like that get tossed up there and stay up there without the tree even falling by any means? And I was awe-inspired. Like, how is that even possible? And, I don't know. I just looked around. I don't know how long I was looking around, but I knew it was long enough there was someone who came up to me and kind of tapped me on my shoulders, like, "Are you okay?" Because I guess I had zoned out and was just taking it all in, like how all this bad stuff is happening. And it was after that moment that I started walking into the church, or what was left of the church, to help clean things up, that I finally realized I know now what I need to do and what I want to do. And that is, I want to present the weather on TV, broadcast meteorologist. I want to be able to keep people safe from these storms that, as Brian Peters talked about, this is a generational thing. So more than likely in my time frame, in my professional time frame, somewhere down the road, there's going to be another outbreak that I'm going to have to deal with if my station is down here in the southeast.
Because our parents went through two as well. They went through 74 and then 2011.
Yes, my dad, will tell me stories from that 74 outbreak. So, I mean, it's possible that we could have two as well. Ours first one was 2011, and there might be another one in the 2050s. Who knows? If you kind of go through that general time frame, it kind of happens every 30 to 40 years.
Right.
And so that's kind of my story of things. It didn't affect me damage-wise. Our house wasn't affected, but it definitely made my career choice. I got to do that now. I was already a weather enthusiast. I was kind of thinking of doing some other things career-wise, but after that day and having to go through the aftermath and helping people, I knew then and there what God put me on this earth to do, and that was, to do the weather, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, we hope that you have enjoyed it. We have had a blast bringing it to you, and there is no better way to end this show with this one final statement from all of us here at the Stingray, or the forecast with Stingray and TP. We hope that you have a great rest of your week, and as always, God bless. And remember, we got one more message for you, and the actual note that I have in this video was written a few days after the tornado by the former probate judge, Harney McCullum.
But the one thing I want to mention too, every time we have a severe weather threat now, people say, will this be like April 27, 2011? That's a bad question, and I don't like it. I don't even answer it really. And of course the right answer is no. That's generational. But all it takes is one. If there's one tornado in the whole state, and if that sucker comes down your street, then that's your April 27th. We have to be ready for every event, whether it's a generational event like that or it's a deal where there's just one.